So this is the educational portion of the program where we all learn something, hopefully, and I'll try to keep it short. But the name of this panel, inspired by the poster for Dr. Strangelove, if anybody's seen that movie, which you should, it's kind of required in this fandom. The Flood of Information, or How I Managed to Avoid Drowning. So here's a short story real quick. When I was making this, I had it all nice and fluid and working perfectly, and then just the other night, I lost like half of it. So I had to remake it as fast and crappy as possible. So this is going to look like it was made by like a grad student or something. So just, deal with it. So if you're not familiar, my name's Nitroid. I've been a part of the Metal Gear fandom since it began in the late 90s, basically, with Metal Gear Solid. I actually started playing in 1989 with the NES game, and then just sort of my life just took a downturn from there. My dad got me a copy, worst decision he ever made. But then I got involved in a lot of fan sites. We're going to talk a little bit more about our sort of villain origin stories at the Kojima Frequency panel, so I won't go too into it right now. But my main interest in the fandom right now is just information in general, how to handle false information, how to preserve important information. There's a lot of it floating around. The series is in a weird place, especially with the remastered collection, and nobody really knows what to do. Why should you care? Most of the games that you probably played as kids are inaccessible right now via legal means. That's just the truth. There's an organization called the Video Game History Foundation, and they do a lot of preservation work. And they put out an article recently that said that 70% of the games you played as a kid or were familiar with are just gone. 70%. That's astonishing. I mean, everybody's always excited when a new game comes out or it's a new re-release comes out, right? But inevitably, they've always changed little things here and there, and it's not quite the same. And when you start to think about things less from a consumer standpoint and more from a history standpoint, if you kind of have that archaeology mindset, it gets a little frustrating to see things that you were familiar with changed in ways that you can notice. So preservation is important because it keeps a hold of the things that sort of built our memories. Otherwise, you feel like this. Every time something gets changed, this is me.
You think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce?
Stop it!
Retrieve valuable truths, and even interpret their meaning for later generations.
Okay, so the sea of garbage. Let's talk about that. It's a great term. How many of these have you guys seen at some point? Yeah, so there's a lot of these. Every once in a while, one's going to come true, but for the most part, they don't. When one does come true, you typically see this behavior where the people who put it out there in the first place, or who got really behind it and tried to spread it and get their clicks for their website or YouTube or whatever, they're like, "See, I knew it all along. It happened." And you see that a lot with the MGS3 remake, with MGS3 Delta. And don't fall for that trap. Remember every rumor you see, which is kind of terrible because then it's getting into your head. But the idea is, if you've got, you've got to have that memory of, okay, what else did this person say? This person also said that MGS1 was going to get a remake from Blue Point. What happened with that? If you've got somebody firing 100 arrows and one of them hits the bullseye, that doesn't mean you're a good shot. And that's sort of what you see with rumors. So just, keep in mind what you're seeing. And when one does come true, try to remember what you saw before it. Clickbait. It's sort of related. How many of these have you seen? The last two are actually my fault. Because I was looking through the Konami website and noticed that they had done some interesting things with the Metal Gear timeline graphic that they had that sort of indicated that maybe they were going to add buttons later. But that's not proof of anything, and I even said that. But that's not going to stop IGN from running an article saying, this seems to be true. And they had some really weird language about it, but everyone saw IGN talking about it and said, oh, it must be true then. That's confirmed. Volume 2 is going to have this, and this. It's a done deal. No more conversation needed. And that's not the case. And I'm saying this as the guy who found it and had everybody run with it. It was really funny to see just a stack of YouTube videos come up on the feed, all mispronouncing my name, which is pretty funny. It's Nitroid, thank you. But No, in all seriousness, I mean, it's wild to see a rumor just evolve into this engine for driving and creating content on the internet, you know? There's not much of a market for games journaling like there used to be with the magazine, so everybody's got to try and maximize the results. And, you know, anytime you try to look up Metal Gear news nowadays, you end up feeling kind of like this. So, yeah, it can get a little frustrating, and you just have to use critical thinking and keep an eye out for it. And the one thing you don't want to do is actually read it. If you don't click it, they don't get anything. Attention is their lifeblood. Starve them of it. So, gossip. Let's talk about gossip for a minute. Robert, do you have anything you want to add here about this one? All right, so he's withholding comment. A good example is Chapter 3. And I'll tell you the truth, I don't know the full story. No one probably ever is. I'll tell you what I think it was. An empty space, much like the rest of the game. You have MGSV ending. You're now in a constant cycle of going on missions. There's no more story. The end game is peace. And for whatever reason, maybe they decided they didn't want to use that card. But I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't this enormous chunk of content that we didn't get in the game. It is not Kingdom of the Flies, which was on the extra DVD. It's not that. It's in a lot of ways a phantom that fans have kind of made into whatever it is they want it to be. And that's not a good way of figuring out what's true, is to just, you know, go by what people think it is. If you hear somebody say something that seems a little too fantastical, just like, you know, dig in a bit, trace it back, find out where it came from and learn more. Another good example of this sort of gossip phenomenon in the fandom has to do with this guy. I don't know if you've heard this name before, Tomokazu Fukushima. Raise your hand if you've heard of this guy. Raise your hand if you've heard that he was the genius behind the story. Yeah, the same hands, exactly. If you've heard this guy's name, you've heard it in conjunction with the same story, that basically he's the reason the stories are so good, and after he left with MGS4, it all took a downhill drive. Which, that's, you know, a speculation wrapped in an opinion, right? It's not fact, and I can prove it. He's actually been asked specifically about this. Now, don't worry, you don't have to know how to read that. So go ahead and go to the next one, and you can see what he said in his own words. That basically, his job was to write supplemental codec dialogue. Now, this is specifically for MGS2. And he is billed as a co-writer on the game. The main story dialogue, the main codec dialogue, it's like 99% Kojima. He does the supplemental stuff. So put the rumor to bed. Anybody asks you about it, tries to say it's true. The man's own words are all the proof you need. All right, let's move on.
Okay, there's a saying that goes, even a bird on high dies a glutton's death, as do the fish of the deeps. The lesson is, don't be greedy. The fish that belonged to a family called the Deeps died from overfeeding, and so did a bird that got high on something, probably fermented fruit.
Okay, if you say so.
The fish of the deeps. Let's talk about that. I'm using this as sort of shorthand for myths and misconceptions. How many of you have heard Solid Snake's naturally blonde? Okay. I'll tell you where that came from. Shinkawa basically mused one time during an interview and said, oh, no, you know, it's a fun idea. Maybe he's naturally blonde. Like, that was it. That was it. And he had some concept art for the idea of having him show up blonde. It never went anywhere. But you'll have people use the art as well as the briefing in MGS1 as some sort of smoking gun. And I don't know how to help people understand how color filters work or how lighting can make dark colors look like light colors in certain settings and how certain art styles are, you know, do the same thing. But there are similar shots of Vamp in MGS4 with the exact same lighting during flashbacks, and surprisingly, it looks like he has light hair. No, you've got to go in and actually investigate the stuff. Listen to what the people actually said. Follow the words. Don't just kind of run with it. But, you know, a lot of fans do that. Another one, and this is going to probably make some people mad. You know, let's do this. Raise your hand if you think Metal Gear Solid V was an unfinished game. You're wrong. Put him down. I know. Okay, where's DRK? Is he fuming right now? Is he in here? Good. Okay. He didn't want him storming the stage. So this is a little hard to talk about in detail, but the short of it is that even if you didn't like a game, and even if there is content that didn't make it into the final product, that doesn't mean it's an unfinished product. There's a big difference. If you look at Metal Gear Solid 2, like 1, 2, 3, 4, really any of them, 4 in particular, there's a lot of content that they made for those games that didn't make it in. Give you an example. In MGS4, they were going to have... yeah, that was one, the poison geckos. I always forget about those. Come up and get a calorie mate for that, seriously. But yeah, there are entire sections of that game that were planned and did not make the cut. So you were going to escort Big Mama through the sewers in Act 3. And you were going to be going up and down through manholes and avoiding Gecko in the sewers. And it was just supposed to mirror when you were holding her hand in MGS3 near the end. And that didn't make it in. And so the scene just sort of cuts abruptly. Additionally, in Act 4, you were supposed to walk across a frozen lake to get to Shadow Moses. There were going to be 2 different paths. You were going to have... in the nuclear warhead storage building, you were going to be able to go to the first floor basement where you met Meryl, and you could go into the commander's room where you fought Mantis, and that didn't make it in. The collision data for that is actually still in the game, as are a lot of the little flashback conversation pieces, and the data miners have done an amazing job digging this stuff out. There's a ton of stuff that you've got, arguably more than MGSV. But do you think that makes MGS4 an unfinished game, or just one that didn't use everything that they had on paper? Most games are like this. They'll have an idea, they'll explore it, they'll see what works, what doesn't, what ruins the pacing, what helps it, and they end up landing somewhere often very different from what they had imagined. That's normal. And I know this is not a popular thing to say, but with MGSV's case, it's just because you didn't like it doesn't mean it's unfinished. So, yeah, I'm gonna get mugged by DRK later. So, all right, next, the timeline. I'll spend a little bit of time on this, but we're going to talk about that later. I know we're kind of burning through what time I've got left, but canonicity is another one, specifically with regards to Portable Ops and Rising, and this is another one of those you're going to start a fight thing. Now, I missed the content creator panel, and I know you were asking some of those questions, so how did that go? So, short answer, the notion of canon doesn't really exist in a normal way in Metal Gear. It's more something a little different. And it comes down to opinion somewhat. There's a long library of writing on this subject, but Kojima's answer basically summed up was there are games that have the label a Hideo Kojima game and the ones that don't. Now, he's never used the word canon in conversation. He doesn't really think about it like that. But that was sort of his distinction between there's the stuff that I sort of took full control on and the stuff that's sort of floating around. And if you want to make that your designator for canon, fine. It really does sort of come down to your opinion on it. But in that context, Portable Ops and Rising don't fit, per the man's own words. The question isn't whether or not they're canon. The question is, what even is canon in Metal Gear? What does that word mean? And it's not clear. So I don't really have an answer for this. The point is more that it's an open question. It's not open and shut. It needs discussion. People need to think about it more. But they're not. They're just having fights on the internet. So, next.
You're drowning in time. I know what it's like, brother.
Drowning in time. Let's talk about that. Okay, who knows what data degradation is? Okay. A lot of you probably not heard this before, but there is something called data degradation or data rot or bit rot, where digital information, in contrast to what Emma says, does not last forever. And in fact, backups need to be refreshed constantly. The disks that you have at home right now in your cases are slowly degrading. They have a shelf life of maybe a few decades at best if you take good care of them. If you back something up to a hard drive, physical platter hard drives, the kind that have the little spinny thing on the inside, those things last maybe 10 years max. Solid state drives are even worse. They are terrible for data preservation or any sort of long-term storage, because even though they're fast, they can only be written to so many times before they stop working. So a lot of people, when they have backups that they want to do, long-term backups, they're constantly refreshing stuff every so many years, or they're using things like DAT tapes, which look like cassettes with long strips, or you've probably seen in movies where they have like universities with giant tape reels that look like cassette spindles, but they're like, that thick and they're that wide, right? Like they're huge. I think Konami uses DAT tape, right? For their archive, something like that. I talked to somebody that wasn't you, and got information I probably shouldn't have, but like I could be wrong about that. But even DAT tape, even something that's a little more analog and reliable in a corporate setting, in a professional setting, has a shelf life. Those typically need to be replaced every 30 years. You cannot one and done this stuff when you want to back it up. It's really actually very complicated to back things up and preserve them. So redundancy tends to be the way to go about it if you want to save things. And I'm not just talking about games, I'm talking about media. A lot of the magazines you probably read growing up, gone. Some movies have been lost completely to time. Most of the classic movies in the early era of film are gone forever. There's no getting them back. Games are the same way. We may have a little more redundancy with things like, online archives and re-releases, but it only goes so far. And if there's stuff you want to save, it's important to learn how to save it. Yeah, that's an example of extreme disk rot, but actually, I'll tell you an example. I wish I would have brought a picture of it, but Twin Snakes. A lot of GameCube discs were not produced very well, and a lot of them are now just rotted to the point where you can't even play them anymore. If they're not kept in a good, dry environment, then they just fall apart because they were cheap media. And all of them are like this. Blu-ray is a little different, but we'll get to that. Okay, next. So lost media is another one. Sometimes you have media that just shows up on the scene, is accessible for a very short period of time, and then it's, the marketplace shuts down, or it's just nobody bothers to back it up or save it. Good example of this is Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake for cell phones, which doesn't seem like all that important. Like, we've got that on other stuff, but it had some unique elements to it. It had a complete MIDI soundtrack, for example. So it's like got unique versions of the music in there. That's gone. That's just gone. As far as I know, I've talked to people in the Japanese fan community, talked to cell phone game archivers or archivists, and it's just, unless Konami wants to put it back out, which I doubt, it's just gone. So, yeah. And so, like, this is about all you can find of it. That's about it. There's one video online of one of the songs playing. That's it. And that guy went offline ages ago. Live service games are another issue. This sort of falls into lost media, but who's heard of Social Ops? So this was Kojima Productions' foray into sort of like a gotcha mobile title, right? And it had some similarities to like Metal Gear Acid, where you're using cards, but a lot of it was automated. And there's honestly very little information about it that's not in Japanese, because it was active for a year in Japan and then it went away. And it wasn't preserved because it can't be. The game relies on data that gets pulled from the internet onto your device. How many people have played a game on their phone that has to go through a long-ass download, right? Yeah. So when you download the app initially, you're just getting like a little shell that pulls in all that other stuff. And all that other stuff is the game, the real content, the meat and bones of it. In the case of this, the app itself is there, but it's empty. There's nothing in it. You can run a blank slate, basically. So that's gone. That's just gone forever. And I've got a couple pictures here if you want to go through and see kind of what it looked like. You had like, Peace Walker style mother base building, and you were using cards to sort of send characters on missions, and you were building them. And another example, and this is lesser known, but this is called Peace Walker, but peace is spelled P-I-E-C-E. Who's heard of this thing? Anybody? I knew you did. So like, got Bad Humans raising his hand here. This was a web game that was created as a promotion for Peace Walker before it came out. And it was basically just like a little online deck building puzzle game where you'd compete with other characters, like a little like quasi tactical strategy puzzle game. It was really weird, but it was neat. It was really well made. And it was web based and account based, and it's gone. Anybody who had an account or played it, it was up for a year, I think, maybe. And then Peace Walker came out. Promotion ended, and they were like, well, we don't need to keep this website going anymore. We don't need it. Nobody's playing it. Bam, gone. And because it's loading things from the back end, it's loading data, it's doing things, that aren't happening on your computer. They're happening on somebody else's computer. You can't get a hold of that. And for something that was kind of minor like this, even if you could, nobody's going to care to do it. So all you can basically see now are these screenshots. That's it. It's gone. There might be a video out there, but otherwise, you're looking at Metal Gear games you will never play and can never play because of how they were made. And I'm not saying you shouldn't make games like that, but there's very little forethought given to what happens when this stuff goes away or when it's end of life. And we'll get to that in a minute. So, yeah, go ahead and go forward.
I can't swim!
You can do it!
I can't!
Come on, Deep down inside, you know you can swim.
I can't keep my water. Endless blue. The water, it wants me. It won't let me go.
All right, then close your eyes. I'll guide you.
All right, a little cheesy, but let's talk about Endless Blue. Preserved media. So I've got a video up here. It's a little long, so we might need to skim through it, but I'll give you an example of something that you probably aren't aware of unless you were paying close attention at the time, but it's thankfully saved.
And now, Hide-chan Radio.
Who's seen this?
From our studios in Roppongi Hills to the sound running through your ears.
This is
Hide-chan Radio.
Basically video of the research trip they took to Morocco when they were making Metal Gear Solid 4.
All right, special edition of the Kojima Productions report. We're reporting
I believe it was
from
Morocco.
Unknown location.
Yeah, it was Morocco.
As of right now.
Yeah. Guess where?
Where are we?
Where are we now?
They did 3 of these.
Where the hell are we? It's been quite interesting. We came in last night, and we're here. It's about lunchtime. We're enjoying a little.
So we don't have to go through the same thing, and if anybody wants to watch these, I'm going to put them online later so you can access them. But they basically just did a bunch of 3 videos on this to talk about where are we going, what are we doing. This is our sort of early research into where we're going to set the game, and there is an endless amount of content like this. I can't stress this enough. It's more than you could ever imagine, and most of it's just gone. The Internet Archive helps with some of it, but not all of it. Thankfully, these are saved. Thankfully, all of the Kojima Productions report, the KP report when they renamed it, Hide-chan Radio, all of these different podcasts that they did, those are all saved. It's just a matter of figuring out how to distribute them. But they're all backed up. They're good. Stuff that's in Metal Gear Solid 4, the DLC. Amazingly, that is preserved. It almost wasn't, though, because one of the downloadable music tracks, the Chair Race song, was removed from their downloadable service, assumedly for legal reasons, and you've got to go through a weird process to get that data off of a PS3 hard drive. Those things are super encrypted. And amazingly, somebody still had the data on their drive, and we were able to get it out, and now all of that DLC is available, and if you basically do a little bit of messing around with your network and pointing it at a different link, you can actually still download the DLC for MGS4. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the guys who did that in a minute. And I know I'm burning through time here, but that was a great example. No, the video's in front of it. No. Okay, I'll just talk about it and we'll skim through. Another example are the Camo Files for MGS3.
And now,
so the original MGS3, you could download Camo Files. They would give you different effects sometimes. Thankfully, those are all saved. They were found on a Dengeki PlayStation magazine disc. Or they just put them up, yeah. So you can just download those. Again, it's getting information out to people on where they can get this stuff is another challenge, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this. Preservation methods. This is going to block what I made, but I'll talk a little bit about it. Go ahead and pull it up. Yeah. So I don't have the time to go through all of these, but there's a lot of different ways you can preserve media. Blu-ray is actually a pretty good media to back stuff up on because they are extremely durable. There's actually a lot of companies that use it for backing up, especially given how big they are. They can go up in excess of 100 gigabytes now on a single disc, which is nuts. And they are made to a higher standard if you get good media and not cheap media, like buying verbatim brand. Typically, they don't fall apart as easily. There's also a company called M-Disc that makes DVDs and Blu-rays that they claim will last 1,000 years. And to be fair, there's been military grade testing on them and they are durable. So maybe there's some truth to that, but again, you can't one-shot data preservation. You've got to have redundancy. You've got to have it in different places and you have to refresh it. There's also a lot of different tools that you can use to get information, whether you're trying to back up old websites, like all the old Metal Gear websites, many of them are not accessible anymore. Some of those are backed up, like the MGS4 website with the little flash game where you can run around, that's saved. Some of them are not, though, and those are just gone. So there's tools for downloading websites, tools for backing up to disk, tools for doing data validation. So if something messes up on a disk and a couple of ones and zeros are wrong, you can run a check and it'll fix it. There's media. There's a lot of different ways you can do this stuff. The Internet Archive in particular, I really recommend donating to because they are basically the last line of defense against things just vanishing from the internet forever. So support them if you can. They are getting sued, and oh my god, I'm so mad about that. So let's go forward a bit. Preserving live services. Now I've got more screens here, and I'm sorry they're not showing up, but let's talk a little bit about how do you preserve a live service game like Social Ops? Well, unless you've got everything or you have enough media, you can't really do it. But the back and forth from your computer to somebody else's with enough work, you can figure out. Oh yeah, there's the list. There you go. I want to give a shout out to the Save MGO community for figuring out how to bring Metal Gear Online back. So the Save MGO guys basically figured out, they reverse engineered the server software for Metal Gear Online 1 and 2. And you can just, play it now. You've got to do a couple of things to mess with it, but it's easy enough that anybody can do it. So you can just play those games. And once they went offline, they were inaccessible, but now not only are they back, the Save MGO guys are actually updating MGO 2. And they're adding new content. They have custom levels now, like 6 of them, I want to say, including a couple of levels that were planned but never made it in. I've actually got some footage of that that's probably going to not work, where the old MGO team was showing off what they would have done with another expansion if they'd gotten to it. But this was on Ustream back when that was a thing. So like another piece of preserved media that most people aren't even aware exists, but this was right around the end of MGO2's lifespan, and they're showing off what would later be called Lethal Leviathan. Outer Haven is a map. And thanks to the Save MGO2 guys, now it is. So you can literally take a map that was never finished by the actual devs and play it, which is amazing. And from what I understand, they're on the cusp of being able to let people make custom levels as well, which is kind of insane. So they're doing some amazing work. Yeah. And it's a little early, but Metal Gear Arcade may be in there as well. So just keep your ear to the ground, but I'll leave it at that. So we can move on. I know we got to wrap up. It's a lot to digest, and there's a lot of media out there that's being lost. And if you care about this stuff, it's important to try and do something, even if you think it's too complicated. Usually there's a guide out there that can walk you through it. There's a subreddit called Data Hoarders, where this is basically their hobby. For anything out there. It doesn't have to be games. It could be movies or magazines or old photos or whatever. And they've basically got a library of content to teach you how to do this stuff. So even if you're not, too computer literate, you can still kind of muddle your way through and do it. And sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, I've got this rare magazine with an interview that I think is cool, and I don't know how rare this is, so I'm just going to, put it in a plastic sleeve, put it somewhere, or scan it and give it to somebody who's cataloging that. Go ahead and click the thing. So yeah, that was sort of where that was going. I'm in advance of that. If you want to follow me, or if you have questions about things, or there's more media you want to see, I'm on Twitter at Nitroid. Just hit me up. I'm happy to help out. If there's anything you want to back up, any questions you have, just let me know. I'm usually talking about something stupid. Either I'm complaining, making memes, or like going into the intricacies of like the cell architecture for like the PS3. Which I mean, I can talk about that too if you want. You sure? Oh no, but like it's really cool. I mean, like they do a lot of stuff.
We are here to talk about anything besides the cell architecture in the PS3. Jesus Christ, dude. How y'all doing, everybody? Make some noise.